All right, Matt. So this is another medical moment, and this is a big one. One of the strange misconceptions in orthopedics that we get asked all the time is people go to like a emergency room or an ambulatory care center, and they're told they have a fracture. And when I
Okay.
walked in the room, I'm like, "How are you doing? How'd you break your wrist?" And they're like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa!" They said it was just fractured. Well, a fracture and a break are the same thing. So the fracture is just the medical terminology we use for a break. Now, what that means is there's all sorts of different breaks and fractures. So you could just have like a little crack. That would be like a stress fracture. You could have a break or a fracture that's not out of place, like the bones in good alignment. That's called a non-displaced fracture. If the bones are separated, if they're angled, if they're bent, that's called a displaced fracture or a displaced break. And then if it's poking through the skin, that's an open fracture, and that's a super big deal. They all can be big deals, but that is today's medical moment is fracture and break. They mean the same thing.
And that's one to grow on. Thank you. First off, I thought when the bone came through the skin, it was called a compound fracture.
So this is why I brought you on. There's no real term in textbooks for compound fracture, but
Huh.
an open fracture is a compound. You're
Okay.
compounding two problems, the break and the fact it's penetrating the skin. Once it comes through the skin, you have an increased risk of infection because of all the bacteria and dirt and contamination out there in the world. But then there's another thing called a comminuted fracture. A comminuted fracture means that at the site of the break, it's broken in multiple pieces. So this is important because a comminuted fracture can still be non-displaced and still be something you can just put in a brace or a cast. It doesn't have to be a big deal. But if it's broken in a bunch of pieces, that means there was more force or more energy going into the break. And so it is more likely to be displaced. And that's one to grow on. And the funny thing is now I think you know as much as Dr. Klepper.
And that's definitely one to grow on.